My name's Daniel. I was already teetering on the brink, contemplating walking away from my marriage long before the final collapse. For years, I'd been trapped in a relationship that felt more like a gradual erosion than a partnership. The moment I knew I had to leave came during a family gathering where I was openly mocked. That evening, after the guests had gone and the house fell silent, I vanished. My wife, Sarah, and I had been married for just over 8 years. In the early days, we were like any other couple, deeply intertwined. We had dreams. It wasn't just about owning a house. We wanted a true home, a shared future. That was the vision we committed to. For a time, we pursued it together. But around year 5, something shifted. It wasn't a sudden break, which made it harder to pinpoint. The real change began when we started trying for children. We both wanted a family desperately. But as months stretched into years with no success, we turned to fertility specialists. Endless appointments, medications, tests, and rigid schedules followed. We did everything they advised. Each month brought fresh hope, only to end in quiet despair that hung over us like a fog. I saw how it affected Sarah. She grew distant, more reserved. At first, I chalked it up to the strain we were both under. We were both in pain. But at some point, she stopped trying, not just with the treatments, but with our relationship. She let go of the dream entirely when it became too heavy to carry. And in letting go of that, it felt like she let go of us too. The warmth we once shared faded, replaced by a cold, formal distance. We still shared a home, slept in the same bed, ate at the same table. But it was like living with a stranger. The silence between us grew heavier with each passing day. What stung most was that she didn't seem to care. She had emotionally withdrawn. I convinced myself that love meant holding on, even when the other person had already let go. About a year and a half before our marriage completely unraveled, Sarah's sister arrived at our doorstep. She'd just gone through a brutal divorce, think screaming matches, accusations of infidelity, and police visits. It was chaotic, and she needed a refuge. Sarah asked if her sister could stay with us for a short time, just until she got back on her feet. I agreed without hesitation. It felt like the right thing to do. She had 2 young kids caught in the mess. So they moved in with a few bags, seemingly for a brief stay, but days turned into weeks. I assumed she'd need a little extra time to plan her next steps. But then weeks became a month. Her belongings took over the guest room. The kids' toys spread across the living room, kitchen, and even our bedroom. Their clothes mixed with ours in the laundry. Still, I held my tongue. But a month became 2, then 3, and she was still there. It felt like an entirely different family had moved into my home, and no one seemed to see an issue except me. Sarah's sister was brash and sharp-tongued, always ready with a biting comment. Her kids were a whirlwind of disorder. No boundaries, no respect for space, no sense of calm. It was like living in a chaotic preschool run by someone with no control. Every day was tense. I'd come home drained from work, craving a moment of peace, only to face another mess. Arguments became routine. Conversations were replaced by conflict. What hurt most was that Sarah always defended her sister. No matter how disruptive her sister was, Sarah had an excuse. I'd raise concerns calmly, and she'd dismiss me. She'd say things like, "She's my only sister," or "You can't expect me to kick her out over something small." To Sarah, my feelings didn't matter. One moment stood out. Her sister was tossing jabs at me, mocking me openly. Instead of stopping it, Sarah joined in with a smirk, saying, "Oh, relax, he's just touchy." Then they both laughed. I felt small, humiliated. It got to the point where I wasn't even sleeping in my own bed. Sarah let her sister and kids take over our bedroom, leaving me to find a corner wherever I could. Some might wonder why I didn't just leave. Believe me, I asked myself that question too, but it wasn't so simple. I believed Sarah's pain stemmed from our struggle to have kids. It had broken her spirit. I thought if we could navigate that grief together, the love we once shared might return. So I stayed longer than I should have, clinging to hope for our marriage. But deep down, I was growing weary. One day, I reached a breaking point. Love alone couldn't keep me anchored in a home where I felt like an outsider. So I quietly met with a divorce attorney, laying out the situation. Weeks later, the papers were ready. But I couldn't bring myself to serve them, not because I believed she'd change, but because a part of me still longed for the way she used to look at me, even just one more time. Still, the tension didn't ease. I started preparing. I made a mental checklist and began working through it. First, I packed essentials, clothes, documents, a few keepsakes into old boxes, labeling them vaguely to avoid suspicion. Then I rented a small storage unit in a nearby town, paying cash. It was discreet, the kind of place no one would think to check. I moved the boxes there gradually. I opened a new bank account under a slight name variation. I bought a new phone. I even picked a new city, somewhere smaller, quieter. I planned every detail down to the exact moment. If the marriage ended, I was ready to disappear without a trace. But I didn't act yet. Despite everything, I still loved her. Buried beneath the pain and exhaustion, I still held on to the woman I'd married. One Saturday, I went out to clear my mind for a few hours. When I returned, the street was lined with unfamiliar cars. Laughter and chatter spilled from the backyard. I heard kids shouting before I even stepped inside. I followed the noise. The backyard was buzzing. Children ran around with snacks in hand. Someone was grilling. Music played softly in the background. People were deep in conversation or joking around. Drinks sat on the patio table, plates piled with food, a full-blown family barbecue. The problem: I hadn't been told a thing about it. I stood at the door, taking it in. It was like stumbling into someone else's celebration in my own home. I kept my face neutral. I saw Sarah laughing with her parents by the table. Before I could say anything, one of her cousins spotted me and called, "Daniel, come help with this." I nodded and crossed the yard. I'd always gotten along with her extended family, sometimes better than with Sarah herself lately. So I put on a smile and lent a hand. As I passed a tray, another relative leaned in, grinning, and said, "Where have you been? We've been here all day. Didn't you know about this?" That's when it hit me. I'd been left out. Before I could respond, Sarah's sister cut in loudly, "If Daniel vanished tomorrow, I bet no one would even notice." Laughter erupted. Sarah added, "I didn't even realize you weren't here." It was supposed to be a joke, but it cut deep. I raised my drink with a half-smile and said, "Let's see about that." A few people glanced at me, probably thinking I was joking too. I wasn't. That was the moment I decided. I was done being unseen in my own life. By the time the barbecue wound down and the guests left, the house still hummed faintly. That night I made my choice. I'd already been considering leaving. After what happened, I wasn't waiting for things to worsen. I didn't need much. Just the essentials: some clothes, my laptop, key documents, and cash in a bag. Before leaving, I placed the signed divorce papers on the kitchen counter, where Sarah would see them in the morning. A sticky note on top read, "Notice me now?" Then I walked out, locked the door, got in my car, and drove away. That night, I deleted all my social media accounts: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, everything. I swapped the SIM card in my prepaid phone and tossed the old one into a drain at a gas station 2 towns away. I didn't want to be found, not by her, not by anyone. I couldn't keep hurting myself by staying. I drove to a small cabin I'd found on a low-key rental site, owned by an older man who didn't pry. I paid 3 months up front in cash. It was tucked deep in the woods, far from the world, but close enough to a town for supplies. I supported myself with small online freelance jobs, enough to cover food, utilities, and basics. Days blurred together. There was no routine, no pressure. I woke to the sound of nature. Weeks became months. My appearance changed. I let my beard grow, started eating healthier, sleeping better, thinking more clearly. I never checked on Sarah. I'd learned that revisiting old wounds only makes them hurt again. 8 months after I left, I logged into an old email account to retrieve a file I'd saved years ago. I wasn't expecting anything, but my inbox was flooded with messages from Sarah. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to delete them unread, but curiosity won, and I opened one. The early emails were angry. She demanded to know where I'd gone, calling me cruel, spineless, and selfish for disappearing. She threatened legal action. Her words were harsh, but as I read on, the tone softened. The questions became less hostile, more uncertain, as if she was grappling with the void I'd left. The newer emails were different. One mentioned the bank sending foreclosure notices due to missed payments. She was working 2 jobs to keep the house. She'd asked her sister and kids to leave, admitting they'd been a burden. She wrote, "I see now why you pulled away. I wish I hadn't been so blind." Another said, "I wish you'd come back, not for help, but because I miss you. I see what you sacrificed to keep us together." The one that hit hardest read, "I was foolish. I took you for granted, thinking you'd always be there no matter how much I pushed you away. I haven't signed the papers. I keep hoping you'll walk back in." I stared at the screen, feeling a pang in my chest. I recognized that side of her, the one that loved fiercely, the one I'd built dreams with. Maybe this was her finally breaking through the haze. But emotions aren't always enough. For years, I'd stayed, believing love could fix us. But now, even with her words tugging at me, I wasn't sure I could return to that life. It had been a year since I'd left. A year of living off the grid, free from ties, breathing easily for the first time in ages. I only went to town every few weeks for supplies. One day, I stopped at a small coffee shop I'd grown fond of, tucked away on the city's edge. As I waited for my order, someone called my name. I ignored it at first. But the second time louder I turned. It was Mark, an old friend we both knew. His jaw dropped like he'd seen a ghost, which, in a way, he had. We made brief, awkward, small talk. I kept it vague. Less than a week later, there was a knock at my cabin. I peered through the curtain. It was Sarah. I froze, then opened the door slowly, keeping my face blank. "What do you want?" I asked. She broke down, tears streaming, apologizing over and over, saying she hadn't realized how bad it had gotten, that she wished she'd listened sooner. I let her talk without interrupting. When she finished, I stepped outside, looked her in the eyes, and said, "I'll come back, but only to close this properly. I'll sign whatever needs signing. We'll end this like adults. But I can't be your husband again, not after everything, not after what your sister did, not after you let it happen." She didn't argue. There was no fight left in her. She nodded, wiped her tears, tried to smile, but couldn't. Then she left. Looking back, it's strange how people only see someone's worth when they're gone. That's one of life's toughest lessons, one I had to teach and endure. I stayed in a broken marriage for years, hoping things would change. But love can't survive when one person is fighting alone. I put up with the disrespect, the belittling, the chaos of my sister-in-law and her kids because I loved Sarah. I became a ghost in my own home. But it wasn't until I left that she understood what I'd been saying all along. Sometimes, people need absence to see what they had. If you're in a place where you feel unseen, I hope my story gives you something to consider. Don't wait until you're shattered to prove you were whole. And if you're pushing someone away, ask yourself why it takes their absence to realize their value. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments, whether you've been through something similar or not. If you know someone who needs this story, pass it along. You never know who's quietly packing their bags, waiting for one last reason to disappear. Thanks for reading.